Please have a seat. Thank you for your kind attention. It's my pleasure to invite to the Bima this morning our friend and congregant, Howard Simon, who has offered to provide the Drash today. Really helpful in the run-up to Purim, which is really a big circus to put together, and also with 5 full Shabbats this month, Kainahara. Really nice to have a friend on the Bima to share the load. So thank you so much, Howard, and please give Howard your full and lovely attention.
Thank you, Rabbi, and I want to thank the Rabbi for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. In today's Parashat Pekudei, the accounting, we read about the final preparations and dedication of the extravagant and ornate Mishkan in the desert and the crafting of the opulent priestly garments. We read as well in painstaking detail an accounting of all that went into those projects and from whom the materials came and in what measure. More interestingly, to me at least, I'm not an accountant after all, the Parsha also describes at the end how the presence of God travels through the desert with Moses and the people. It's that last mysterious section I want to consider with you today. Now, you'll recall a couple of weeks ago, we read about the molten calf that the people made after Moses took some time coming down from the mountain. As the rabbi noted, one interpretation as to why the people were enough troubled by this to go so far as to create an idol is because that in Egypt, the people had seen all gods represented by idols or other physical manifestations. Thus, it was hard for the people, without Moses' guidance, to accept fully the notion of a God who could not be seen. So when Moses remained on the mountain so long, the people's faith wavered, and in fear, they returned to the paganism with which they were familiar. We also know from that story that the mountain was shrouded in a mysterious cloud so that God's presence couldn't be seen by anyone other than Moses. That cloud reappears in today's Parsha and represents an interesting compromise between the people's need for reassurance that God was with them and God's unseeable, unknowable presence. In chapter 40, verses 33 through 38, we read that once the work was completed, a cloud covered the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and that the presence of God, Kavod Adonai, filled the Mishkan. That Moses could not enter the Ohel Moed while the cloud had settled on it and God's presence was within it. That the people could set out on their continuing journey only when the cloud had lifted. And that throughout the night, instead of a cloud, fire would appear in the Mishkan so that all the house of Israel could see it. So this is the compromise. Because the people were new at this invisible monotheistic God stuff, Moses understood that the people needed to be able to see something, even if they couldn't be God's panim, God's face. So God's presence could be in the Mishkan with the people, but always hidden behind a cloud or a pillar of fire. What strikes me is that throughout both these narratives, the presence of God, Kavod Adonai, is described as both present and hidden, on the mountain or in the Mishkan, but always there. Why would God hide in plain sight? What is the narrative trying to convey to us? There's a parallel here to the creation myth told by Rabbi Isaac Luria of Safad, known as the Ari, the 16th century mystic and founder of the main branch of what we now call Kabbalah. In Luria's myth, creation presents an inherent problem. Because God fills the universe wholly and completely, God had nowhere to put the world. For that reason, the Ari taught, in order for creation to occur, God first had to self-contract, in Hebrew, tzimtzum, to create sufficient halal hapnui, empty space into which God could pour the divine light of creation. Many commentators have pointed out the inherent contradiction in this story. As Rav Nachman of Bratslav, the great-grandson of the Ari, explained it, only in the future will it be possible to understand the tzimtzum that brought the empty space into being. For we have to say the two contradictory things. One, that the empty space came about through the tzimtzum, where, as it were, God contracted God's presence, and it was as if in that place there is no God. And two, the absolute truth that God's presence must nevertheless be in that space, for certainly nothing can exist without God giving it life. So how are we to solve this essential dilemma that in the creation story of Lurianic Kabbalah, God had to withdraw from the empty space as to enable creation, while by definition being present in all spaces at all times? Luria found the solution to this in a further myth, the Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, which describes how, as part of the Tzimtzum, God created holy vessels in the empty space into which God poured the divine light of creation, thus continuing God's presence in that space. But the vessels weren't strong enough to hold the divine light, and they shattered, leaving broken shards of God's light hidden throughout the world. This left humanity with the task of tikkun olam, of raising, through mitzvot and deeds of chesed, loving kindness, the sparks of divine light, thereby healing the world and making creation whole as God intended. In Lurianic theology, once humans have completed that task, the Mashiach will come to acknowledge our repair of the world, to celebrate with us, and to usher in the Messianic age. Something I like very much about Lurianic Messianism is the way that it differs from its Christian counterpart. In some Christian Messianic thought, Jesus will return on the day of judgment at a time of catastrophic upheaval and separate the believers, who will experience the rapture, from the non-believers, who will be, let's say, overheated for all eternity. In many Christian traditions, however, the Jews, God's first chosen people, will not immediately be judged. Rather, after having been ingathered in Jerusalem as prophesied in the book of Daniel, hence the strong support for Israel by evangelical Christians, the Jews first will be given an opportunity to accept Jesus as the one true Messiah. If the Jews refuse, I got my money on refusal. Only then will they suffer the same toasty fate as other non-believers. The critical difference between these competing images of the end times lies in the agency of ordinary people in bringing about the Jewish Messianic age. In most Christian traditions, the Messiah will come to sort things out only once humans have made a colossal mess of everything, thus requiring God's grace to be saved from the chaos and destruction that then reigns over all the earth. In the Jewish mystical Messianic tradition, on the other hand, the Messiah will come not to judge, but to celebrate, when through the good acts of individuals, humanity successfully has lifted the shards of God's light of creation and thus repaired the world. The Shvirat HaKelim myth illuminates much about today's Parsha. Luria allows us to envision a God hidden among us in the shards, and thus accessible and available to us through our acts of kindness, while still transcendent and beyond comprehension and thus inaccessible. In other words, although God's presence In other words, Luria named the first of these aspects of God the Shana, roughly the aspect of God that dwells in a place, and the latter, Ein Sof, literally unending, the most profound aspect of God that is well beyond human comprehension. And so too in today's Parsha. The cloud covered the Ochel Moed and Kavod Adonai filled the Mishkan. In other words, although God's presence abides among the Israelites, it is obscured by the cloud. So deeply obscured, in fact, that not even Moses could enter the Mishkan while the cloud hovered. But then we read, when the cloud went up over the Mishkan, the Israelites would journey forward in all their journeyings. This wonderful image resonates fully with Lurianic thought. God's presence is always with us, but when it is hidden, either by an impenetrable cloud or in the broken, hidden shards of divine light, It is the incomprehensible Ein Sof, and forward movement is not possible. But when the cloud lifts, or an act of chesed redeems a spark, God's presence becomes accessible as the imminent Shana, and we can then advance toward completing our ongoing task, whether that task is to reach Canaan or to repair the world. Whether one believes or one does not believe in a cloud-hidden God who accompanied our forebears to Eretz Yisrael, indeed, whether one believes or does not believe in a divine presence at all, I think there is a meaningful lesson and some comfort to be found in today's Parsha. We all carry within us a cloud that obscures our humanity, a cloud that leaves us unmoved at the sight of a mother begging or an addict passed out in the street, a cloud that makes us react angrily to the slightest provocation. We all carry within us a cloud that obscures our ability to perceive the shards of light hidden in plain view all around us. And our clouds grow thicker and colder as we watch the world around us become more and more broken. But our Parsha teaches that only when the cloud lifts can we move forward. Only with that clarity can we see what is expected of us, and only in that light can we advance toward fulfilling those expectations. And the Ari teaches that it is wholly within our power to disperse our clouds drop by drop with each act of kindness that we do. And by making things just a bit more clear, each act of chesed makes the next one easier to see and the next one easier still. And in this way, by these small actions, we can accelerate, albeit in imperceptible increments, toward a repaired world. It matters not whether one thinks of that as reaching Canaan or redeeming the sparks, or simply as being fully human. What matters is that we each have the power to lift that cloud through the contents of our action. Yehi Ratzon, may it be within us to do so, to use that power wisely, with kindness and generosity, to begin to repair this broken world. Shabbat Shalom.